Go ahead, Jordan. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Fantastic and wonderful. Cool. So I think where I want to start out today, I'm going to see if I can nudge people a little bit past the post-lunch coma food thing that happens right after lunch. And let's see what we kind of get here in terms of hand raisers. Who here is still using Configuration Manager in their environment and no Intune? Raise of hands. Let's see if we get any reactions out of people. There we go. All right, now we're starting to see some people raise those hands. Yep. Okay, so we've still got a pretty decent number of Configuration Manager people here. Who here is running Intune only, no Config Manager? Okay, so we just have either running Config Manager. It sounds like everybody here still has Config Manager or is not sure on the hand raise one yet. All right, cool. So then, with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to steal the screen share away from you, sir. Go ahead and do this real quick. Bring this up. I want to kind of walk through some ideas behind reporting. And anybody here super familiar with SQL? Anybody here that's like super like, yeah, SQL, I like SQL as a config manager admin. It's my favorite part of being a config manager admin. No, everybody is kind of like, no, SQL is kind of weird. All right. Well, I will share with you that SQL and Configuration Manager is quite possibly one of the best resources that you can take advantage of when it comes to reporting, and doubly so when it comes down to trying to create patching information and learn about patching in your environment. To that end, I want to cover a couple of very quick do's and don'ts for anyone who's just getting started with SQL and how we can start to kind of leverage that and walk it into some reporting aspects, either just building quick CSVs or quick pieces of data to ask quick questions about it. So the first thing I want to start with is what are some of the things that we are allowed to do inside of SQL? So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new query here. And let's go ahead and also, we'll go ahead and we don't need Object Explorer anymore. It's fine. We'll go ahead and do a quick, let's go ahead and see about making our font here a little bit bigger. View and trying to think about, actually, you know what? I'm just going to use zoom it a lot. It's fine. So the first thing to know about in terms of SQL is that select is pretty much almost always safe. If you want to query something, you can pretty much almost always start with select. Select is a safe bet. Query words that are very bad or you shouldn't use are things like this one is very scary. This one is very scary. As a general rule, though, select star from is a pretty safe query. Now, if you've ever heard from a certain individual named Benjamin Reynolds, you'll probably have seen there's also a reason that whenever you do a select and a star and a from, is that you should always capitalize them simply for some performance reasons along the way. They will actually help out with performance and ensuring that everything gets cast correctly and properly along to things. I'm going to walk through a couple of different views today. And Frank, if you like, I'd be happy to write these down and share them out in an email afterwards if people are interested in. I want to share with everybody here a few views on how we can start to use those couple of views to get started with becoming, maybe not a reporting hero, but at least start using it to answer some questions without having to go through 900 different collection views or different views inside of Configuration Manager. Those couple of views are v_r_ system, v_update info, and a few others we'll jump to as well in here. And I'll just kind of, I think what I'll do is I will, as I'm going to add them, I'm just going to put them in here in comments at the top. If you've never seen this before, the way that you comment a line in SQL, much the same way that you comment stuff in PowerShell, is by using the -- statement. It would help if I had Zoom It running on this machine. Let's go ahead and get that running. Cool. Oops. There we go. So these are a couple, like I say, just a couple of the most common views that I typically will use is system and update info. Now, You will see some people will mention a couple of other different views from VR system, but let's start just by taking a look at seeing what data is in v underscore r underscore system. That is not how you spell the words, apparently. And let's go ahead and run that. So if we just run that, we can see that we in fact have a few different machines that show up inside of a config manager environment with some different pieces of lab information about them, who their username is, and different pieces of information. Now, a lot of this might not be stuff that's useful or relevant or anything that you care about at all, but it might be some stuff that's actually particularly useful to you. Maybe you want to know about all of your machines that are virtual and you want to know what host they belong to. Well, if you happen to have Hyper-V machines in here, you can actually go ahead and grab that. So if we do stuff like select name 0, comma, oops, virtual machine, machine host name 0 from VR system, we can actually go ahead and get, not PowerShell, Jordan, we can actually go ahead and get stuff like, hey, the name of the machine, as well as the virtual host that currently hosts the machine, which is some pretty useful stuff as you kind of get out into larger and larger organizations and environments. But how is this useful when it comes to trying to do patching? Well, in order to find out information about patches, there are a few different views that we might want to query and look at. If we go ahead and type in good old, I'm going to do capitalization here, select star from, and I'm going to do top 10 to start with. V underscore update, and we'll see that we have a few different views here when it comes to updates and compliance. And this is what makes reporting so darn hard when it comes to software updates. Now, you might look at this and you would go, well, certainly I would want all. The answer to that is, well, maybe. It depends on how large your environment is, and it depends on what level of granularity of detail you care about when it comes to updates and their status. V underscore update compliance status all is an amalgamation of a set of table data that includes every single possible state that an update can have, including unknown. Now, unknown is a very vague and nebulous state out there. Unknown can be something as simple as I haven't seen it before, all the way down to I actually have an unknown result. I don't know about it. And to some people, unknown is scary. By and large, for me, unknown typically means it just hasn't scanned for that particular update yet. And I don't find that particularly scary. I find known machines that I know are missing patches to be much more scary personally. And so I tend to lean on V underscore update underscore compliance status instead for doing a lot of my basic reporting. So let's go ahead and just do a select and a top 10 star from V underscore update compliance status. And if we go ahead and give that a quick run, and if I remember that I'm running in not PowerShell and I'm running in SQL instead and hit F5 instead of F8, that would be very helpful. And you'll notice that we get these weird things like CI ID, resource ID, status, last status check time stuff. This right here, who from this can tell how compliant or not compliant their organization is? I'm going to take a wild guess that, oops, if I hit the wrong button, that certainly doesn't help. I'm going to take a wild guess that probably nobody can really recognize what is or is not patched from this particular chunk of information here. It's actually incredibly difficult to try and figure out what is or isn't compliant. And the reason for that is because as Configuration Manager grows and sprawls out its data, it becomes more and more reliant on these two identifiers, these resource IDs and what are called CI IDs, configuration item IDs essentially, or item IDs that are scattered throughout the entirety of the environment. And there are some relationship views that you can go and you can query. I'm not going to talk about those too much today. I'm just going to focus on these couple of specific ones that I know the relationship mappings on, where you can actually go through and build those out to get an idea of patching in your environment. So how do we relate this update information to an update? How do we know? Well, I mentioned another view earlier. I'm going to go ahead and add this to my little list of things to send afterwards. Oops. Well, we do select top 10 star from v underscore update. Again, if we just kind of scroll down through here, oh, look, there's that's update info one that I was talking about earlier. And if we go ahead and run that, we can get the actual information about all of the updates that are currently in our environment, or at least the top 10 that are in the database, which happens to include this wonderful title and description information. Now, it also includes weird things like update source ID and min source version and locality and description and info URL, and all of this wonderful, glorious information that happens to live inside of our SQL environment. But the important thing is that it includes this key right here, or a CI ID, or an indexed value. This key here is how we join information together to start to merge and marry that data. So what we can do is we can actually do something like this, where we can actually merge those queries together. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit different and a little bit maybe than some other user groups. And I'm going to kind of start to build this query, and I'm going to showcase this to you. But then afterwards, I'm going to see what type of trouble or what kind of things interest you all from a database perspective. So start thinking about this while I'm kind of writing this together, and maybe we can see if we can actually live query SQL together to get some interesting information about it that might be something that you would want to take home with you and query your configuration manager environment about. So start to think about that while I'm kind of cobbling this together. So for this, what I could do is I could say, you know what? I care about the title of the updates. I want to know the title because that's really the thing that helps me understand what it is. So I'm going to say I want to get the info and I want to get the title property. I'm going to say I want this. I'm also going to say that I want to get v underscore update info dot article ID. Seems reasonable enough. I want to know the article ID. That's what Microsoft uses to actually sort out updates just in general. And I'm also going to say, you know what? I want to be able to look it up on the internet and learn about it. So give me the info URL as well. And how am I determining what the heck those are? I'm just scrolling off to the side and I'm reading what they are over here. I just happen to know that that's what they're called. Plus IntelliSense is helping me out a little bit. So I'm just kind of piecing together those components. So if I just say, hey, give me those things from here, and I run that, you can see that I now am getting all that update info populated in here as it's available. That's pretty interesting and pretty neat. But how does that update info of 1,227 different updates then relate to the compliance status of it? Well, the way that we can go ahead and we can actually start to merge this info together is we can take the update info table and we can join using what's called a left join to start to join all of our update compliance status information to the update information from it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a left outer join v underscore update underscore compliance status on v underscore update info. And yes, this is literally just me being silly and happening to know this. And I'll go over how I just happen to know this in a moment here. This is going to say, hey, I want to join all the data from update compliance. And I want to specifically join this key, the CIID field, anywhere it matches on the CIID field from the v update info view, and merge those two pieces of data together. And I can then say, because I'm doing that, I can then go ahead and merge information for v update compliance status information as well. Which means I can do things like this and pull in the compliance status for all of those updates for any machine that is scanned against it. So we can see here, I've got, oh, the update shows up 3 times. Well, that's because it's been scanned by 3 different machines and its state is 3. Now, 3 is not a terribly meaningful piece of information, right? I mean, if I was to tell CEO, hey, I've got 400 machines in a state of 3, odds are super good that they're going to look at me and they're going to go, huh? Well, state 3 happens to mean compliant. And so what we can do with that then is we can actually generate what is called a case statement to convert that state into something that is meaningful. So what we can actually do here is we can actually do and set this equal to 0. So let's do 1 because 0 doesn't exist in this view. 1 happens to be not required. 2 happens to be not compliant, also known as it is required. 3 happens to be compliant. What I can do now, oops, let me end my case statement here. That'll help significantly. Call it like patch status or something like that. We'll see else NA because we don't know what it means if it's not any of those particular values. Because it shouldn't be anything else other than null. And if we go ahead and run this, we can actually see, hey, these machines right here, or whatever machine this is related to, is compliant. Now, what's interesting is you might not be like, okay, well, that's great, but now how do we relate this back to machines? Well, if we go back and we look at our compliance status table, if we rerun this view over here, sorry, view, not table, you might notice that there's this resource ID column over here. And resource ID exists in the VR system view, which means we can throw another left outer join up here. Let's do v underscore system r underscore system on v underscore update underscore compliance status dot resource ID equals v underscore r underscore system dot resource ID. Now that means we can now pull in pieces of information from that view as well, which means that we can add stuff like v underscore r underscore system dot name 0 and v underscore r underscore system dot maybe we want to see virtual machine host name, or we want to see what host it lives on because maybe we're trying to troubleshoot it, or maybe we've got an environment with lots of different domains in it and we want to get its full domain name or something of that nature behind it. And we can go ahead and grab that too. And now, if we go ahead and we run that, we'll go ahead and we'll get the patch compliance status for this particular update for this particular machine that's running on this particular host and is a member of this particular domain. And that is how, in 30 minutes or less, we've essentially just generated in SQL here a poor man's compliance report for all of the updates that exist within our environment. And a quick little move around here where we could just take this chunk of data right here. And we could say, you know what, maybe I want to move this up to the front. Let's put that at the front instead, because I want to be able to put it at the front of my CSV spreadsheet here. And we can go ahead and highlight this and give it a quick run. And there we go. And now we can start to get ideas from this. And from this, it's just a simple matter of starting to build out some pivot tables or, build out some different views and stuff like that inside of Power BI or whatever we would like to. And we can start to leverage that for figuring out what we are or aren't compliant against. We know what our article IDs are, and we can actually start to build some compliance and reporting things. I'll go ahead, and I'm actually just going to put this in the chat here for everyone. And let me go ahead and throw this down here. And before I go any further, are there any questions about this? Does this make sense? Have I just done weird things, or am I starting to convince you that maybe SQL might be a good place to go for finding information about patching and things like that inside of your configuration manager database? Don't be shy. 15 lines or less. Look, we can get compliance data. No questions? Okay. Who here is running Defender for Endpoint with in the cloud? Anybody here running Defender for Endpoint in the cloud? Defender ATP? Okay, see a few hands going up there. Okay. Who here would like to see, maybe I shouldn't ask it that way, but what if I told you you could get this information with even some more verbosity out of Defender for Endpoint in the cloud using PowerShell and have it delivered to your desk every day? That be something people would be interested in seeing, taking a quick look see through? I think it might be fun. Cool. Let me go ahead and stop sharing here real quick because while SQL is cool, PowerShell is a little more readily accessible, I think. Let's go ahead and bring that up and we'll take a quick trip on down. Let's go ahead and bring up this, and this, and this. Share this. So I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier on. Cool. Can everybody see my screen here? Make sure that's seeable again. Yeah. Cool. All right. So I know I mentioned it earlier. We talked a little bit about app registrations when it comes to Intune. Well, something that people don't always think about is there's app registrations for a whole bunch of things, in fact. So if you drop on out to security.microsoft.com, and if you happen to have E5 out there, then you just have it. If you have EMS E5 as well, then you also just have it. But in general, there is a massive amount of data that exists in the security portal out here. One of those pieces that exists out here that is extremely useful is basically everything that is under this hunting table out here. So if you go in here, we go to advanced hunting, you'll find that there's a component down here called device TVM software vulnerabilities and device TVM software vulnerabilities KB. I'm just going to pop this up here real quick and hit run query just for the purposes of an example. And what you can see here is you can see, hey, look, here's all the device software TVM inventory from the threat vulnerability management database. Now, if you happen to be a small business and you don't have Defender E5, but you do happen to have Microsoft's small business license, they actually recently, as of November, I believe it was of last year, started including this TVM data for inventory information in that licensure, which is super useful if you don't have a big configuration manager environment and all you have is an Intune environment behind you to help you out. TVM is able to give you a ton of different pieces of information. So if I just go ahead and do something like, hey, give me my vulnerabilities, hey, look, it's a poor man's vulnerability scanner. We can actually pull in all the information about, hey, here's all the different vulnerabilities from different products, from third-party products to first-party products that are running around. My home machines are, as you can see, very non-compliant at the immediate moment. And some of them are non-compliant because they haven't been turned on for 6 months, but that's fine. And we can see that we have all this information. Now, this information in this format is not terribly consumable, right? Like this isn't terribly helpful to me at all. And the fact that I had to come out here and like fight through 10 different windows in order to get to it, to then click on a device, to then go to a vulnerability page, then review how to actually fix it is not exactly terribly helpful because now I'm looking at it this way and I've got to go through yet another clicky. Doesn't scale with 4,000 different machines in your environment, now does it? What we can do though, because at the end of the day, what this is this is an API. And if you actually drop on down here into what's called the API Explorer down here, you can actually click Get 10 Vulnerabilities. And you can see over here, API US Security Center, Windows.com. So that API/vulnerabilities, top 10. And if you hit run query, it'll actually drop down to you the top 10 vulnerabilities that you have in your machine environment in here. What's interesting about this, though, is that you don't have to include that filter in it. You can actually just say, hey, give me all of the vulnerabilities, please. And it will actually dump out to you all of the different vulnerabilities that you currently have, as well as things like security recommendations and more. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how APIs work, or if you've never worked on them with PowerShell before, the extent of what you need to know is that you can query anything that's on the internet, essentially, with a couple of lines of PowerShell. In fact, there's really only a couple of things that you really need for it, and that is invoke web request. You can do pretty much anything you want with invoke web request. And that will let you reach out and get your query a webhook, query a web page, and you can hit just about anything on the face of the earth that is classified as a URI. So if I do something like invoke web request patchmypc.com, I can actually poke patchmypc.com and have it return back the front page to me in a data stream. And it'll hand it back to me as a request here, and I'll get a 400, and it'll tell me, hey, this is all the data that comes back from it. See, there you go. Whole bunch of data for it. The same thing is true for APIs. So if I put in something like an API like this into it, I should clearly be able to just hit that, right? It's a website, it's a page. Why not? Well, maybe. It's yelling at me here. Now, why is it yelling at me here? It's yelling at me here because APIs require a second thing when you go to query them. The second thing that they require, if you've never done something like this before, is they require authentication. In much the same way that I logged in using my Windows credentials to access the SQL database to then pull data out of it and start to organize it and structurize it, I need to have an authentication token in order to query the API and get data back from it. The way that we do this and the way that we provide permissions in a limited fashion, rather than just using our entire user object token, one of the ways that we can do this is we can create an Azure App Registration for it. So if we pop out here, who here has created an Azure App Registration before? Let's see. I can pop up the chat again. Okay, we got one. One person here has created one, two. All right, cool. Well, we're going to walk through the process of creating an Azure App Registration here. So if I just pop out to good old portal.azure.com, actually going to jump on over here into App Registrations. I think I actually have an example over here of it right here, but it needs a new token. Now, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to showcase, grab these permissions here real quick, just so I have to remember. I believe it's just TVM stuff. Yeah, machine, software, and vulnerability. Cool, that's what I thought. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new registration called Defender for Endpoint. Sure. We'll say accounts in this organization. This is my personal test tenant. I'm going to go ahead and say register. Please don't go trying to steal my vulnerabilities after this call because you're going to see my application secret. That's fine. And then what I'm going to do is here is I'm going to come over here to the left-hand side, and where it says API permissions, I'm going to select that. This is also, I know I mentioned the Patch My PC Intune stuff earlier. This is also the exact same way how you would set up a connector into Intune. Different permissions, same concept. I'm going to go ahead and remove the user permission from this because I just don't need it. It's just an extra permission that's just sitting there. And then I'm going to add a permission. Now, normally you would hit something like Microsoft Graph, or you would pick one of these other things over here, like a dev service or a whatever, or pick any of these different many buckets of possible permissions that you could choose. In this particular instance, I'm going to choose what's called APIs my organization uses. And I'm going to go ahead and type in Defender up here, or maybe maybe I'm not. All right, fine. What are you called? You go grab the name of the API from the other registration. It has a weird name because they've changed the name for Defender like 3 different times here within the past year. It changed a grand total of, I think, 3 times within the span. Windows Defender ATB is apparently what it's called now. And of course, it won't just pop up with Defender. So we'll go ahead and we'll choose the Windows Defender ATP option. We're going to choose application permissions because I don't want to actually have to sign in for it. I'm going to choose that I want to get read permissions from machine read because sure, why not? I want to just give machine read all. And we'll go ahead and we'll say software, and we'll say software read all. And we'll go ahead and say we'll say vulnerability read all. We'll click add permissions. That's then going to give us the machine read all permissions, the software read all, and the vulnerability read all permissions. I'm going to go ahead and say grant admin consent because I'm going to say it is A-OK for those particular pieces to run. And we'll say you can run, you can run, and you can run. From here, I'm then going to generate a token. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about before. When I tried to just poke the API and say, hey, give me the data, it said, no, I'm not going to. So I have to provide it a key, essentially, to hit that API with to generate what's called a bearer token. And to do that, I'm going to pop over here to certificates and secrets, say new client secret. I'm just going to say temp. We'll say that it's good for custom. We'll say that it's good for today, because then way, when you record this and play it back later and you see my super secret squirrel stuff, you can't reuse it. Sorry. So now I have a secret here that has permissions to query my machine information out of TVM, as well as my vulnerabilities out of TVM. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Be mindful that once you leave this page, this value goes away forever. So I'm just going to pop over here. And I'm just going to open up a good old-fashioned notepad. I'm going to drop in my secret right there. And I'm going to go ahead and go up to overview. And I'm going to grab my application ID as well for this particular application. I'm going to put this down here. Now I'm going to use those two pieces of information to generate what's called a bearer token later on. I'm going to need one other piece of information in order to do all of this. And that is my tenant ID. 2 seconds here. I'm going to go and grab that as well. Okay, that's right here. Now, I do happen to have a little PowerShell script configured ahead of time that I've prepared to do this. And this PowerShell script is available out there on the internet. Go ahead and go out here. I'm going to grab this from my blog. You can have it once my page loads eventually. Is this query right here. This is in the chat. And what we're going to do is I actually have the script already loaded here. This is that I'm going to walk through the process of I'm going to generate a token. And I'm going to request a bunch of information and smash it together into something usable. So I just take this secret ID, go ahead and throw this here in this app secret field, paste that in. We'll grab our application ID, slap this in, and we'll grab our tenant ID. And we'll slap that in up here. Now, before anybody goes, man, Jordan, that seems really, really insecure. Why would you ever showcase this or anything? The way that you make this more secure is twofold. One, you either put this in as an Azure App Registration, and you deposit this tenant ID, app ID, and app secret ID into what's called a secrets vault inside of Azure. And then you have the Azure App function call it, and then all of the code stays self-contained inside of Azure, and then you can't access it. Nobody can access it except for the secret itself. That then protects it and keeps the actual data safe in terms of how it gets generated and gathered. And then you have it email it to you using the Azure App function to email the data to you afterwards. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to generate a auth body as well as a chunk of information together that I'm going to send off to Azure. So here we have our invoke REST method. You can use invoke REST method. In this case, because I'm interacting directly with an API and I'm actually doing a RESTful web service call, so I'm using invoke REST method. There's basically two methods. You can either use invoke REST method or you can use invoke web request. Either one doesn't really matter in most cases unless there's specific performance things you're trying to work around. Go ahead and run that. And that's going to generate a bunch of client data. I'm then going to reach out and I'm going to use this to generate an authentication token or an access token that I can use to access data inside of Azure. This then generates what I call a token. If we take a look at that, what that looks like. This is how you log into Azure essentially with an API. I don't know about you, but this is not a password that I could ever possibly hope to remember or to type in more than once. That's for sure. I don't even think I could type it in once. And this token here, this temporary token, is good for a set time frame. It's good for 90 minutes, basically. What we're then going to do is we're then going to reach out to that vulnerability URL. Now, you may have seen this before. Here's that exact same vulnerability API that we pulled out information from over in the web browser. This is pretty cool. So if we just go ahead and pop on over here, we can then highlight this block of code right here and say, you know what? I want to go get all of that information about all of those vulnerabilities. It's going to go ahead and run down to there for now. So what that's going to do is that's going to go and get the vulnerability data as well as go and get some machine data. So let's pop down here. And if I just do something like machine data and hit enter, we can see that there's some information in there. But if I hit machine data and value, then we can actually get information about all of the machines that I currently have registered in my Defender for Endpoint information. Additionally, if I was to do something like, hey, what about my vulnerability data? Same thing. Familiar? There's all the CVE data as well as the severity information and the fixing KBID information for on how to fix, remediate, and resolve those security problems that we were worried about and report on what vulnerabilities we actually have to management if we need to. What that means, though, is that now we can take all that data together because we have those keys, those primary keys, and we can start to mash it all together with this next chunk of code here. Let's go ahead and give that a quick run, which now produces what's called this ending data object, which includes a series of objects with all of the different vulnerabilities they have, and they're fixing KBIDs for anything that is a Microsoft patch, at least in this case. So for anything that's a Microsoft patch, it would have the fix for it. For anything that's a third-party patch, you wouldn't have the fix for it, but you could go and you could look at someplace like Patch My PC, and we can get all that information to help patch those vulnerabilities too. This is a cool little way that you can leverage some different pieces of PowerShell together to go ahead and start querying that and to get that query data delivered to you every day so that you can start to hunt and look for vulnerabilities in your environment. So I promised earlier on that I would try and leave some time here for any types of questions about this. Now, this graph query here that I did with this graph token stuff, by the way, is not limited to just this. You can actually query anything inside of the endpoint portal, basically, with that. If you're unfamiliar, you can actually come out here in endpoint.microsoft.com. Basically anything that's in here, you can query like devices, application information. You can query it the exact same way. You just have to go get the graph endpoint. And if you use Control-Shift-I or F12 developer tools, you can actually capture what that is. So I actually come out here and I go to like this and devices and do all devices. You can actually do Control-Shift-I, and let's do network. And if I just clear this real quick and I do a quick refresh on this page, you can actually see where it runs the query to get the managed devices information. And this is the actual graph query it's calling. So you could use the exact same method that I just used over there to build the auth token and then query the device management managed devices one without the expanded different pieces in here to get that same information that's being displayed in the console back. Now, I was mentioning earlier that I would leave some time towards this at the end and for people to start thinking about it. But is there anything in particular in SQL or on the PowerShell side of things that anyone would like to see that we can just kind of work through live together on this call? I'm opening myself up to a whole bunch of risk here. See what kind of questions, see if we get any stump the chump questions. No questions? No concerns about my sanity even?
Any questions for Jordan, guys?
You showed in Defender for Endpoint that you can query for like devices that are missing CVEs and all of that. Can you query for devices missing specific patches like KBs by KB number?
So the answer to that question is it's complicated. So the question was, can you query for things that are missing by KB number? Kind of, but it's in a reverse backwards methodology. So what you would normally do is that you would query for the you would actually query for the entirety of the data set and then dump it back if you want to do it via PowerShell. But if you weren't going to do it via PowerShell, what you could do though is you could say, hey, let me go slide over here. See if it's got. I'm looking to see what all exists in this table here, the advanced hunting table for this. So depending on what all is in it, let's see, CVE ID. You could do it by CVE ID, and you could do it by, it looks like down here, it would have, let's see. vulnerabilities KB. No, that's the vulnerability KB data. I don't know that you can do it directly. The easiest way to do it would be to just query to get all of the data back and then filter it through. So for example, what I would do if it was me doing it, let's say that I wanted to, is I would run this query that I just built and ran here. And then what I would do is to say, okay, so let's say I'm looking for something here. Ending data, pipe, where, object, $ null, and E. Oops. My keyboard just had a key pop right off the side of it. That's awkward. Dot fixing KBID. So let's say that maybe I wanted to find all machines that were missing this KB5013942. I would basically do what I just did from here, from this perspective, and I would say, hey, where object, KBID, and that would give me all the machines that are missing that specific KBID. There's technically a way that you can get around it. The challenge is that that KBID information doesn't exist where it's supposed to exist. Let me see if I can get this data to, come on, go down. I need the room up here. Thank you. So let's see, fixing KBID over here information lives under vulnerability. So it's going to be under, let's see which piece here. It's going to be under each vulnerability in the vulnerability list, where the vulnerability list is developed by the vulnerabilities. So it's going to be underneath one of the machine vulnerability API, and I'm not sure that that exists underneath the advanced hunting model. I think that only exists under the API model for it. I don't think it exists in here, so I don't think you can advanced hunt it. It looks like the way you go about getting it is you would do it via the API Explorer itself, as opposed to underneath advanced hunting.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. We were trying to figure out how to do that through advanced hunting, and we were having no luck. So
I don't think it exists.
Okay, great.
In advanced hunting. So, all
right, thank you.
Yep. Good question. What else we got? Yeah, I don't see it anywhere in the schema knowledge. Other questions we want to talk about from a patching, reporting, SQL, PowerShell, Patch My PC perspective.
Any other questions for Jordan, guys?
I don't yell, I promise.
If not, we can take another break here. So the last hour or however long it goes, I was planning to spend just answering general questions. So I know Jordan was, maybe asking some specific questions about SQL and some of the things he's covered. But if there are other things outside of, the things Jordan covered that you guys were hoping to talk about today, that's what the last hour is going to be for. I'll either try to answer it to the best of my ability. I don't know if Jordan can stick around. If not, no biggie. Or anybody else on the call. That's the opportunity here, is that we've got several peers in the community that are on the call right now that we have the opportunity to run things by if maybe they are doing the same things that you're trying to do, and maybe experienced similar struggles and have gotten through them or found ways to resolve those things. So that's going to be the plan for the last hour, or like I said, however long we get questions for. Or if there's something specific that you guys would like to see, I can do the same, offer up the same thing Jordan said. You know, if there's specific questions or things that you want to try to work through together, even in my lab, I'm up for that as well. I can't promise that I'll be able to get through every specific scenario that might get thrown at me, but I will certainly try. So yeah, let's just take 5 or 6 minutes. We'll come back. It's 3 till, let's come back at 3 after. We'll do another 6-minute break here.